Hi, everyone. Welcome to our live sacred space session for this month. We're finally back. We're back from the Bali retreat. We're back from all the travels and everything. And it's everything was unbelievable. And also it's good to be home. So I just want to thank everyone for joining me here in this session. Gary will be here too in a few moments as well. And I just want to say, as always, I'm just honored to be here with you in this time of sensitivity and transformation and change. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things we'll do together in our session here today are, number one, we will, there's a couple of housekeeping items I want to sort of remind everyone about the events coming up. We'll set sacred space. And then we'll talk about our overall topic for the session, which is how to restore your connection to the Muse when it's been lost. And we'll talk about sort of how we think about that. We'll have a bit of a suggested exercise, and then we'll close sacred space. So just a couple of housekeeping announcements. The Bali retreat, about a month ago now, is complete. It was fabulous. Thank you, everyone, for your support. In April, starting this week, we're starting the live, the online advising cohort with me, and the topic will be the healing power of grief. The healing power of grief. We've sent the final reminder emails out to everyone. Some of you have accepted the terms and conditions, but haven't quite signed up yet. So today will be the last day to sign up. And then I think late tonight, tomorrow, we'll send out the materials for week one, and then we'll get going. The month of May, the cohort will be the advising parenting cohort. This month, next month, we're thinking about, there's two other cohorts I have in mind. I'm not sure about the timing. One is, it's around by around mid-year, we should probably do another Bliss sort of live cohort. And there are other topics around boundaries, people pleasing, and in particular, a sort of emerging topic on neediness. Anyway, if any of that sort of resonates with you, let me know, because your feedback is kind of a signal to me as well, kind of a Muse signal. And then, of course, last week of June, we have the two back-to-back 3-day retreats in Paris, healing your connection to money and healing your connection to body. People are in the process of signing up for that. And yeah, just any questions, if you're like, is this right for me? Should I do this one or that one? Send us email. We'd love to chat with you. Okay. The final sort of housekeeping announcement is that I'm getting a bit of a signal or a download on the topic of dream reading. And I'm still sorting that out, where dream reading needs to come more front and center in the things that I do around here. Obviously, we do a ton of dream reading in the cohorts and in the retreats. And so for Live Sacred Space, the thing that is coming to me is basically, if you would be interested in exploring dream reading, and again, it's just very embryonic, so no promises, send in dreams if you would like via email for Live Sacred Space. And in the next few months, we may do a bit of time in a session, maybe a dedicated session to dream reading, where the dreams, maybe a bunch of dreams, will collect. will be the fairy tale we use for the session. Um, this is complete wild ass brainstorm, so I'm not sure where this is going. But those of you who have worked with me know that in some ways, the core of what I do when I do live cohort sort of in-person retreats, one-on-one advising, the core superpower of what I do is actually dream reading. And it's been this kind of thing for me where, you know, on my public website, I don't even talk about the fact that I do dream reading. So it is this hidden superpower, but also lost board member of mine, even though I do it like every day. And I think because the fear is always if I talk about my dream reading in public, you know, it's not going to scale, right? So I think the time has come, my Muse download, to sort of address that and figure it out. So anyway, I do dream reading. And if you would like to potentially have a dream read, just send me in your dreams. Typed, please, only typed. I need to scan and rescan. So listening to an audio doesn't work for me. Just the way the brain works. And when I have a collection of dreams from this channel, I'll sit with them. Gary will sit with them. And we'll see if any kind of pattern or cleaner signal emerges from the Muse, kicking my butt, pushing me in this direction. Okay, so that's the last housekeeping update. All right, so so with that out of the way, let's set our sacred space together. So what we would like to do now is to create a space together, a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to be able to open up to higher guidance from within our own selves, whatever form that may take. It could be a muse that gives you insight and intuition. It could be just a hunch, a gut feeling, random flashes of insight, however we think about it. A safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no feeling or danger or threat of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the nourishment, right? The emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I always do, that we all follow, to the best of our ability, the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Online, because everything's public, we do that via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be. Come into the Crowdcast stream, go into edit profile, change your profile name to whatever you like, and then continue, interacting anonymously, only if you want. That's number 1. Number 2 is that as much as possible, we try to refrain from giving anyone else, and ourselves included, giving ourselves any feeling of threat or controlling or fixing or tough love, right? So fear, threat, and control, we refrain from that. But even well-meaning fear, threat, and control. So when I say, this is good for you and you've got to do this or else you're not going to get your healing, and so no tough love. Not that tough love is bad, but because it is of the provenance of control, even well-meaning control, it dissipates the sacred space, which is by definition a space devoid of fear, threat, and control. Right. So we can do that later when we're back in profane space. But for now, we do our best to hold space for each other, however we find ourselves to be. So if you're afraid, we leave you as you are afraid. If you're anxious, if you're happy and relaxed, if you're angry, we just hold space for you to be as you are, sort of in this shared sacred space. The third principle is no commerce. So it's a corollary to the first 2 principles. And so basically what that means is that nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please refrain from selling stuff to each other in the chat or other channels. But also this covers recommendations. So even if I want to recommend a book or something, that I'm not getting, sort of compensated to promote or whatever. We even refrain, again, do your best, right? We refrain from doing that because any kind of recommendation, oh, you should try this for that sore ankle or whatever, is a veiled kind of threat, right? A well-meaning threat, but it's like, so if you don't read this book, if you don't take this medicine, the threat is that you won't get your healing or pain relief, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's just because of the space we're creating, we don't do that here because we're trying to generate a different kind of space just for the next hour or two, so that we can get the things done that you can only get done in sacred space, which is take in, download, and then after that we can continue, as we were before. Said another way, here in sacred space, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide, not for your value add. Okay. And so the last principle is that also a corollary to the first two. There is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You don't have to stay. You don't have to chat or ask questions. You don't have to invite your friends. There is no fear, threat, or control trying to whip you into coming to sacred space or staying in sacred space because there is no fear, threat, and control. Right. So again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your moment-to-moment willing presence and attention only if you want. From what you are, not from what you do or provide. Right. And all of us together will tend to amplify that effect when we do it for ourselves in a group and do it for each other. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's okay. We'll still be friends. We'll still catch up with you in profane space. But we are about to cross the threshold into our sacred space. So if this is not the plane you want to be on, we will pause for a moment to give everyone a moment to withdraw or stay as they choose. And then we will continue on from there. Okay. So we'll just give everyone a moment to dial that in and make their selection. Okay. All right. So for those of us still here, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold into our shared sacred space, I will just gently remind everyone, myself included, that in this space, we would like to observe to the best of our ability the 4 principles of sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no interventions, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome back to Sacred Space. Welcome back to Sacred Space. Okay. So for this month's session, my brainstorm session with Gary led us to some insights about the importance of not just male, but masculine. So masculine being within us, initiation within ourselves and within society. This came to us through a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale that Gary read for me and will read for us. And with this story, we followed the golden thread of the Muse across all these mythopoetic symbols and came to this sort of insight around how the Muse helps us navigate the different phases of life, even when our lives have not been set up properly from the get-go to pursue her, to follow her. Right? We grew up in a household where we weren't initiated into things like the Muse, and we were taught to be on the straight and narrow, and how she will come in later life often anyway, and help you sort of reclaim that and reconnect. Okay. So with that, I'll invite Gary to come on screen. Gary, if you're there.
Hi, Artie.
Hello. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be back.
Yay.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to lead us and tell us about the story and, tell us the story itself too. Yeah.
Okay. So this is more, a more well-known Grimm's brother story. Not as popular as, say, Cinderella or The Frog King, but I think it's fairly well known. So this is a story called Trusty John or Faithful John. And I've read this several times, back and forth, going through the Grimm stories, and I don't like it. I didn't like it, so just pass over it and say, maybe the next time or never. So I picked it this time because this is funny how all this works, right? I spent like the entire time from the last live sacred space session till about last week looking for stories, and I couldn't find anything except this story.
Right.
I would come back to the story and I'd be like sitting with it and saying, no. So finally gave in and said, okay, let's do it. So Faithful John. All right. So, okay, let's start.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
And once upon a time, there was an old king. He was ill and he was lying on his deathbed. And so he thought of his most faithful favorite servant, Faithful John. I mean, he was even called Faithful John because he'd been so loyal to him for his entire life. And so Faithful John came to him, and the king addressed him and said, I feel that I am going to die. And my only concern is for my son, because he's still young and he may not always have the best judgment. And I won't be around to guide him and advise him. And now I won't be able to close my eyes in peace if you don't promise me that you will never leave his side and you will teach him everything that he needs to know and you will be his foster father. And of course, Faithful John said, well, I will not leave him. I will serve him faithfully, just like I have served you, even if it costs me my life. And that's a promise he makes. So at this, the old king says, well, okay, now I can die in peace. But I have a few things to tell you. After my death, I'd like you to show him the entire castle, like all the chambers, all the halls and vaults and all the treasures inside. But do not show him the last chamber in the long gallery. And you know the chamber, which contains the portrait of the princess of the golden roof. Because if my son sees that picture, he will fall violently in love with her. And he'll fall down unconscious and he'll put himself at great risk for her sake. And, it'll be just a mess. So I want to protect him from that. And you must protect him from that. And so Faithful John once more made his promise that he will do everything to protect his son. And after this, the king just laid his head on his pillow and he died. And after all the funeral and the grieving in the morning and all of that, Faithful John said to the young king that it is now time for you to see your inheritance and I'll show you your father's castle. And so he took him everywhere, up and down, all the magnificent chambers. But he would always walk past that one chamber. He would not open it. And this one contained this portrait that was supposed to be so dangerous, right? And it was dangerous because it was so masterfully painted that it seemed to live and breathe. And it seemed to be like the most beautiful thing in the whole world. And so the young king noticed that Faithful John would always walk past this one door. And he asked, why do you never open this door for me? What is inside? And he replied that there's something in there that would frighten you and it's best you don't see it. And the king said, well, I've seen the entire castle. This is the only room that I don't know. And I want to know what's inside it. And, it just happens in such a way that Faithful John keeps protesting and tries to persuade him not to go in there. But the young king is stubborn and he wants to see. And so finally, Faithful John gives in and he takes the key from the large ring, opens the door. And the portrait is placed in such a way that as soon as you open the door, that's the first thing you see. And so the king looks at the portrait, and so beautiful. It just glistened with gold and precious stones. The king just fell unconscious to the ground, just as the old king had said. So Faithful John picked him up, nursed him, help him gain consciousness. And the first thing that the young king said is, I want to know whose portrait that is. And so Faithful John says, okay, that's the princess of the golden roof. And the king went on, I will risk my life to win her. And you're my most faithful, John. You must help me. Because my love for her is so great that if all the leaves and all the trees were tongues, they wouldn't be able to express how much I love her. And so then, the faithful servant was like, okay, this was coming. And we know that the old king said he will go to great lengths to put himself at risk to win her. And so we must think of some way where we can make this happen, but not risk the king's life. And so he thought of a way, and he told the king, well, everything that this princess has around her, everything is made of gold. The tables and the chairs and dishes and household equipment, everything is made of gold. So I'd advise you to, get all the gold out of your treasure. There's like 5 tons of gold. Have your royal goldsmiths fashion each ton of gold into like a manner of utensils, artifacts, sculpture, birds and beasts and all of those things. She'll like these things. So we'll go to her and present them and try our luck. And so the king did what Faithful John advised. And when everything was done, they loaded on board like an entire ship of all of these gold artifacts. And Faithful John and the king disguised themselves as merchants. And so they sailed across the sea and they sailed on until they came to the city where the princess lived. And then the Faithful John then told the king to stay behind on the ship and wait for him. And so he said he will set out first and see that everything is okay. And he carried a couple of golden things in his apron, went on shore and went straight to the royal castle. And he showed the servant by the door the things he carried. And he said, I've come to meet the princess. I'm a merchant. I've come from overseas and I have these golden things which I think the princess will like. And so he was shown in. He went in front of the princess, introduced himself and said, I'm the servant of a rich merchant. And we have got some gold things that we think you'd like. And he showed her the things that he brought with her. And the princess was delighted. She loved the things that he brought. She looked at them and said, well, they're so beautiful. I would like to buy them. And then Faithful John said, well, this is just a sample. I've got so many beautiful and valuable things on board. But it would be impossible to get everything here because it would take days and days and days to just, offload everything and bring them to your presence. And so the princess then said, oh, well, then take me to the ship. I'd like to go there myself and I'd like to see everything. And so he happily led her to the ship. And when the king saw her, he realized she's even more beautiful than the portrait. He looked at her, he thought his heart would break. And so she boarded the ship, and the king led her inside. He introduced himself as a merchant. And as soon as they went in, Faithful John told the helmsman to set all the sails and just leave, like start sailing. And inside, the king was showing her all the golden artifacts and all the beautiful things. And many hours went by, and she didn't notice that the ship was sailing. In her delight, she looked at all the things that she just completely forgot herself. And so when she came to the side of the ship, she realized they were in the middle of the sea. She said, "I've been betrayed, I've been kidnapped, and I've fallen into the power of this merchant." And then the king said, "Well, I'm not really a merchant, I'm a king. And now that I'm a king and you're a princess, the only reason I tricked you into coming with me is because of my great love for you. And the first time I saw your portrait, I fell to the ground unconscious, and I would do anything for you to marry me." And so once the princess heard the whole story, she felt a little comforted, and she said, okay, and she consented. And now it so happened, the only thing left was for them to sail back and for them to get married. So they were on the ship, and Faithful John, who was sitting at the front of the ship, was, everything's done now. So he was making music, he was playing an instrument. And he saw 3 ravens flying through the air. And right as they were above the ship, they were talking to each other, and Faithful John listened to what they were saying because he could understand them. And the ravens were saying to each other, "Oh, look, the king's carrying the princess of the golden roof home." And the other said, "Well, but he doesn't have her yet. Because this is no good. Just taking her back to his land is no good. Because as soon as they land, there will be a red horse that will leap forward to meet him, and the prince will want to mount it. But if he does that, it will leap into the air with him, and he will never be seen again." Right? That's what's going to happen. And so now the raven said, "Well, is there no escape? Is there no working around it?" And so the answer was that yes, if someone else quickly mounts the horse, takes the gun from the saddlebag, shoots the horse dead, then the young king will be saved. But nobody knows that, right? And if anybody does know it and tells it to the king, he will be turned to stone from his toes to his knees. So, and the thing is, even if he's saved from this, there's the next thing that's coming. Like, even if the horse is killed, the young king will lose his bride, because when they enter the castle, there will be a wedding shirt made of silver and gold. But if he puts it on, it's actually just sulfur and pitch, and it will burn him to his bone marrow. And so what's the solution? Well, one of them said, "Well, if anyone with gloves seizes the garment and throws it into fire before the king even picks it up, then he can be saved." But that's no good. No one knows this, and even if they know it, they can't tell the king. Because the moment they tell it, the body will become stone from the knees to the heart. And then there's more, right? Now, even if this was done, there's one more thing that comes up. Like, after the wedding, if they get to this point, they get married. After the wedding, when the dancing begins and the young queen is dancing, she will suddenly turn pale and fall down as if she's dead. And if someone does not lift her up and draw 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spit them out, she will die. But if anyone who knows that reveals it, his entire body will turn to stone, from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, his entire body. And so after the ravens had said this, they flew away, and Faithful John had to think. Because if he revealed what he had heard to his master, he would have to sacrifice his life. And there was still kind of no guarantee that everything would work out for the king. So finally, he said to himself, well, I will save my master, even if it brings destruction on myself. And so when they landed, just as the ravens had said, there was this beautiful red horse that came forward, and the king said, excellent. This horse shall carry me to my castle. And he was about to mount it when faithful John pushed in front of him, jumped on the horse, drew the gun, and shot the horse. And everybody was shocked. And this was shameful because the king wanted to mount the horse. How could you shoot it? And the king said, well, leave him alone. He's my most faithful John. He knows what he's doing. And who knows what good may come of this, right? And so they entered the castle, and in the hall, just as the ravens had said, there was a platter, and there was the wedding shirt that looked like it was made of gold and silver. And the young king, looked at it, and he went towards it. He was about to take hold of it. And faithful John once again pushed him away, seized it with gloves, and threw it into the fire, burned it up. And everyone is like, how could he burn the king's wedding shirt? And the young king still said, well, he's my most faithful John. He knows what he's doing. Leave him alone. And now the wedding took place. It was a grand wedding. And the dance began. And faithful John was very watchful. He kept looking at the queen. And suddenly she turned pale. She fell to the ground. And he ran quickly to her, picked her up, carried her into a chamber, laid her down, and then sucked 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spat them out. And immediately she breathed and regained consciousness. So the young king saw what happened, but this was a point that he could not take anymore. And he grew angry and shouted, throw him into prison. Right? And he was condemned to the gallows. He was going to die. And at the last minute, faithful John said, well, everyone who's condemned to die is permitted to say one last thing. May I have this right as well? And the king said, sure. And faithful John then went on to tell him why he did what he did. He related how all of that conversation of the ravens at sea told him of the things that were about to come. And he had to do it in order to save the king. And the king immediately regretted what he had done. And he asked for his forgiveness. But before he could even finish saying this, he saw that faithful John had turned to stone. And this caused the king and queen great grief, because he had served them with such loyalty, and this is how they'd rewarded him. And he could do nothing about it. He said, if only I could bring him back to life. But there was nothing to do. So he ordered the stone figure to be taken up and placed in his bedroom next to his bed. And every time he looked at that stone figure, he would cry, wishing that he could bring him back to life again. And so some time passed, and the queen bore twins, 2 sons who grew up and, were just delightful. And one day when the queen was at church and the 2 children were sitting beside their father, they were playing. The king was looking at the stone statue, and again, sadly, he said, if only I could bring you back to life again. And this time, the stone started to speak and said, you can bring me back to life again if you will, in return, give up what is dearest to you. And the king cried and said, for you, I will give up everything I have in the world. And so the stone continued to say, well, if you will cut off the heads of your 2 children with your own hand and then sprinkle their blood on me, I shall be restored to life. So the king was horrified that he'd have to kill his own dearest children, right? But then he thought of faithful John and the great loyalty that he had showed, how he had died for him. He drew his sword and with his own hand cut off the children's heads. And then he smeared the stone with their blood. It came back to life. Faithful John was standing right before him, like nothing had happened. And he said to the king, "Your loyalty will not go unrewarded." And he took the children's heads, put them back on again on the bodies, rubbed the wounds with their blood, and they immediately became whole again. And they jumped about. They started playing like nothing had happened. The king was just overjoyed at this. And then he saw the queen coming in, and he hid faithful John and the two children in a cupboard. And as soon as she entered, he said to her, "Have you been praying in the church?" And she said, "Yes, I was constantly thinking about faithful John and all the misfortune that befell him because of us." And then he said, "Well, my dear wife, we can give him his life again, but we will have to sacrifice our two sons." And the queen was shocked at this. She turned pale. But she said, "Well, we owe it to him for his loyalty." So the king rejoiced at this. He was so glad that she said the same thing that he said, that he opened the cupboard and brought forth, faithful John and the children and said, "God be praised. Everyone is saved. We have faithful John, we have our sons, and everything's good again." And he told her how everything had happened. And they all lived happily until they died. Okay. So, Artie, would you like to come back? Okay. There you are.
Whew. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
That story is a lot. All right. Thank you for reading that story. Thank you for always picking our stories. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
And so let me start the way I usually start, which is to ask you now, where do you enter into this story?
So, like I said, I didn't like the story, right? I picked it. And every time I would feel compelled to read the whole thing, and then I would be like, I just don't like this. And my usual thing with picking stories is that, I'm usually excited or delighted with some little detail that's fun. And that's the feeling and the sense that I'm looking for when I'm reading new stories. I'm looking for that something that is delightful or is exciting. And in the story, after a while, I thought, well, this is a strong reaction that I get for the story. And that's kind of a signal too, right? There's something there that's kind of provoking this reaction. And so I sat with it, and then I realized that I struggled to hold space for the young king in the story. Right? I mean, when you're reading a story or I'm telling a story like this, I'm actually holding space for all the characters there, right? And this is sacred space, and we're reading a story in sacred space. So I'm usually not judging any of the characters for what they do, right? Oh, you're wrong. And this is, you just kind of present it the way it happens. It just plays out. But with this story, I was really struggling to hold space for the young king. And particularly the point when, faithful John goes to the princess and, prepares this entire plan on how to lure her into the ship and how they would take her back.
Right.
What a baby. That's so, I mean, even at some point I was like, I know what faithful John is doing, but really? So, yeah, so that's what I felt when I read the story. And it was interesting to me that I was, struggling to hold space for this. and as you go and you talk about all the things that come out of this, the insights that come out of this, I sat with it after our discussion and kind of informed me of how it speaks to my own situation and everything, my own inner masculine, all of those things. I'll talk about that a little later, but yeah,
Okay.
this was mainly how I felt.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's interesting. I had heard this story before, obviously, but when you brought it up, I was like, it's vague. I don't really remember the details. And it's interesting because when you read it, it just screamed of male initiation to me, right?
Yeah.
And which is itself a huge topic, right? But when we talk about male initiation and the way it should happen properly, right? We often then talk about how male initiation very rarely happens properly in modern society, right? Because we have lost elders, we live in a toxic patriarchy, we've lost the power of initiation, these sort of traditional human function is lost in like the mechanized, industrialized modern world. And there's all kinds of theory, schools of thought that this is the loss of traditional values is linked to the Industrial Revolution, blah, blah, blah. So there's all this stuff, right? And so we end up with a society which is populated on the masculine side with boys, not men. Boys, not men. Energetically, and in the absence of men, we can't have kings, right? You need boys to be initiated into men, and then among the field of men is where kings are grown. Kings don't grow out of the field of boys. Now, this is all energetic. And you can read this at the level of society and bemoan modern society in the outer world, but you can also read this mythopoetically at the energetic level as sort of an X-ray, a state of affairs that is so within each one of us to varying degrees, right? Which is how we read these mythopoetic fairy stories. Not as a sort of commentary on outer society. You could do that. But for me, it's always more interesting when I look at this story and I think about my own inner masculine, right? And the different aspects of the inner masculine. Why is this function? So in a society or even in your own self, what is lost when you lose the king function? Forget about the man function. Just, the king is like the core pillar that holds it all together, right? Within an inner realm, an outer realm, what have you. One of the key energetic functions of a king within you, within any given person, regardless of your external gender, is to hold and transform grief. The number one function can be argued of a king within you is to hold and transform grief. Right? Because to hold space for grief, you need your fullest power in full bloom, and that is the power of your inner king/queen. There's a feminine aspect of it as well. And I think it's interesting that this story is coming up now because we're at the top of April. We are starting in like 24 hours, right? Our month-long cohort on grief. And how do you reclaim the lost art of grieving? Right. So we have this imbalance in society, and we have this imbalance reflected within us, which is this loss of king power within each of us. So grieving is one function, but the other key function of a king is the ability to bestow blessing. We've talked about this multiple times before. Right. And in the absence of blessing, there is no neutral, right? It's either or. If you don't have blessing, then you are in a state of being cursed. And if you are in a state of curse, you feel it. It inflects, you're angry all the time. The way you see situations is never with generosity and compassion. It's just, and it's a lot of fear, threat, and control, right? Blessing and curse, sacred and profane. And the loss of the power of grieving and the loss of blessing go hand in hand. If you can't process your grief by midlife, you have this bag of pain and losses you've suffered that becomes this very long bag of things you've been dragging along with you since you were a child. And the curse is that these ungrieved things become poison, right? And typically by midlife or after midlife, this bag of losses, unprocessed grief, has become so long and so heavy that you can't carry the bag anymore. You continue trying to brute force your way forward, and you literally fall apart at the seams. Another term is that you're living this basically zombie life, right? Where, like in the Fisher King story, from the Arthurian Celtic mythic cycle, which is a very sacred text. The text literally describes this situation when it describes the unhealable wound of the Fisher King as being, he is left in this agonizing lifelong state of being too ill to live and yet unable to die. That is the zombie state of life. Okay. And so to reclaim this craft of properly grieving the losses and transforming them into blessing, when we talk about grief, this is what we're talking about. Now, the thing is, these Grimm's tales are very old. They're obviously pre-Christian. Some scholars date them to be as old as 10 or 20,000 years old in terms of the fragment shards of the stories. So these patterns, these story patterns, are of human archetypes. The Grimm's fairy tales, every collection of these fairy tales is like a library of case studies of human life patterns, right? And this is pagan wisdom, right? And to survive the Christian era, the Grimm's tales were wrapped up as just children's tales, perfectly harmless. And they're padded with all kinds of, covering your ass, right? So at a critical point in the story, right, when the king is deciding whether to behead his two sons with his own hands, he's like, well, during all this, the queen is going to church, right? And they're good Christian. I mean, it's just all of this sort of padding and window dressing, and that's fine. Because they embellished it this way and protected it with bubble wrap in this way, this story literally was not burned and has survived to us intact in its current form today. This is one of the reasons why these fairy stories are so precious, because they survived basically, sort of Christian persecution and Holocaust intact. So you unwrap it and you're like, I don't understand, why does all this weird stuff happen in these like Disney children's fairy stories? When you read these stories like a dream, the mythopoetic lens, all the wisdom comes tumbling back out again. So for those of you who are new to sort of live sacred space and our work, the way we read myths and stories is with a mythopoetic lens. And all that means is just a fancy way of saying, when we read the story, we regard every major character in the story as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner world. Okay, so in this story, the king is you, the princess is you, faithful John is a part of you, the horse, the shirt, the children are all part of you. And then we look at how these different parts within you interact in the story to get insight on the various archetypes and the overall pattern as well. Okay. So this story for me, given the overall pattern, is a story of what initiation is, a story about initiation of this masculine life force within you, regardless of your external gender. And how initiation is recovered, right, when the initial initiation was not textbook. Right, so basically, when your initial initiation gets screwed up because of you're in modern industrial society, whatever, right? Is there a hope of recovering that? And if so, how does that happen? And that is what this is a story about for me. Because you take the story from the top, right? Right from the get-go, the first king dies too early, and there is no one to initiate the young king properly. Right.
This is somewhat like like how in the Odyssey, Odysseus is away at war, and he takes a long time to get back, and his son's growing up, and there's no one to initiate him, and he doesn't even know his father is alive. So then so there's this. We did this, so I want to link that session here, the story of Telemachus and how he goes in search of his father, and how he is initiated by mentor, quite literally, where we get the word from. So
right.
I think I'll just find the link.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you for bringing that up, because here, what we will go into is the fact that to heal this botched initiation, the Muse steps in and takes over, acting through Faithful John to correct the screwed up initiation. And it's interesting you bring up Telemachus, because the exact same thing happens in the Odyssey. Telemachus's initiation is screwed up because his father is absent. His father is absent because of the Trojan War.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the Metonic cycle, it's actually not the 10 years of the Trojan War, but plus the 9 years of the Odyssey. So it's a full 19 years. So he doesn't come back until Telemachus is 19.
Yeah.
Way past the age of initiation.
Yeah.
And yet, how is he initiated in the absence of his father? The suitors, all these like sort of negative sort of male figures trying to sort of mess with him, right? It is the same thing as happens in this Faithful John story. The Muse intervenes directly. And in the Odyssey case, the Muse goddess figure is Athena. So it is Athena that comes in and intervenes. She is the one who literally takes the bodily form of Mentor and mentors Telemachus and tells him, you need to go look for your father, enough screwing around here, go down to the docks, get a boat, and go. I'll take care of everything. So the real Mentor is off somewhere else, right? And Athena takes the form of Mentor and acts through Mentor to guide Telemachus. So everything we're going to talk about is the same thing that happens in the Odyssey in terms of this shard, this mythic archetypal pattern.
Yeah.
So this tells you two things. One is there is a way around this then. There is a way to heal it.
Yeah.
Okay. And the second thing this tells you, I mean, if it happens in the Grimm's Tales and it happens in the Odyssey, what it says to me is that this is a valid, legit case in the library of human existence. Right? It's not like it should be this and oh my gosh, it's screwed up. It's like, well, if it's screwed up at the root DNA level of Western society, which is the Odyssey itself and Grimm's brothers. Right? So this idea of something coming out half-baked, stumbling out of the starting gate, is a normal part of the human experience. Right? So you can say, oh, in the modern era, we've lost this and that. We have boy men in our society. We've lost our rituals. This story says that, yeah. It's not just this, unique point in human history. This shit happens all the time. And when that happens, this is how you fix it. This is how you fix it. Okay. So what happens? So if the king had not died so early, the original king, the boy's father, would have initiated the young prince at the right time. Right? He would have said, okay, so there's this door, you can't go in, and you're not the king, I'm the king, so I'm going to dictate when you can go in and not. There's no override. You can sneak in. That's a whole other sort of fairy tale style adventure. But at the right time, when you're strong enough and you figured out, you've been fully initiated, then at the right time, we will introduce you to this princess and then everything will go properly. So that's not what happened because the king died too soon. Now he has to entrust it all to Faithful John, who is also an alternate aspect of the inner masculine. Right? The Faithful John part of you is entrusted like the sort of pre-Christians entrusted this wisdom to the fairy tale, this code of what to do, right? And wrapped it in all this Christian children's myth and like sent it forward in time for us to receive on this side of it. Okay. So the Grimm's brothers fairy tale collection itself, the Odyssey itself, is like a faithful John, right? Where it's like this line of inheritance was like broken by just history. And the golden thread of wisdom is continued in this sort of smuggled wisdom through fairy tale and myth. So this code of what to do comes through, and all you have to do as the young king is to trust it, right? If it says on the label, faithful John, just shut up and do what it says, right? Seldom do we get such clear sort of direction in life. But when we do, it's very hard to follow. Right? But you can see, obviously the king is going to do, the young king is going to do what he's not supposed to do. Right? What are you going to do? This is life. So when that happens, it's all messed up. Right? So now faithful John gets co-opted into this scheme to bring all of the gold and insight of the kingdom, to go out, lure this sort of feminine princess of gold. This princess of the golden roofs is the princess of insight, right? Gold that shelters you, is on the roof, right? Lures the vision, the visionary feminine in. The young king takes her, not in good faith. Not in good faith. This is not how you want to do it. But she forgives him. Okay. So this whole initiation thing was botched from the beginning. This is this uninitiated king doing uninitiated shit, which is messing up the courtship with the princess. Okay. And she, as the sort of stand-in for the goddess, forgives him. Okay. So the whole tenor of this story is this whole thing was botched from the beginning, and it's continuing, one domino tumbling into the next, screwing up. And how do you correct it? How do you pull, it's like a spinning plane with an engine out of control. How do you stabilize it and pull it up so it doesn't crash? And this is the situation in our world, right? Our presidents and kings are boy men, right? They do not respect the feminine. They do not respect the earth. We can bemoan it, but we have to keep going. We're not going to stop, right? So then the one question for society is, what is our faithful John and how do we follow it? Okay. So the trick here is that the faithful John masculine figure within you, the mentor figure within you, is secretly connected to the divine and to the muse. Right? In the Odyssey, it's like a big neon sign. It's like, mentor is not even mentor. Mentor is actually literally Athena. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. Here, it's a more subtle giveaway. The subtle giveaway that faithful John is connected to the muse is that he understands the language of the birds. Okay. And I think in 5 or 6 different stories in the past few years, we've hit this archetype and motif of like understanding the language of the birds. What does it mean to understand the language of the birds? And basically, it means you're connected to the muse and can receive download from the muse, basically, right? And Gary will link to stories where, if you want to cross-reference and go deep on that. And for those of you who did the Muse cohort with me in, I think it was January, right? These ravens talking amongst themselves and then accidentally overheard by faithful John is what we would call a Muse download, right? And you get this insight and download where the ravens basically explain everything. Okay, 1, 2, 3, ABC, step by step. Here's what you do. This is why we know faithful John is connected to the muse, because he can understand the language of the birds. When the ravens come and he hears them chattering, he knows to stop playing music because he's like, oh, hang on. I'm getting a download. I need to stop everything. Even though it's my blissful music, I need to stop. Everything stops. And I need to make sure I get this accurately. And when he follows the recipe of the ravens, step by meticulous step, everything works out perfectly. Okay. There is no subtlety here, right? When you get the Muse download, and you go, why isn't it angels? Why is it ravens? Doesn't matter, right? When you have the sensitivity developed for the tuning fork of the Muse, it doesn't matter what form it comes in, right? It can come in the form of the Odyssey. It can come in the form of a Grimm's fairy story that you've like put off for a year, not wanting to read it, and it finally comes through. You know, what we talk about in the Muse cohort is after a while, you get a feel for what the texture, sound, and feeling of the Muse voice is. Right. And in the month we spent doing that, we were like sort of honing our sensibilities and palette for that. So when the Muse download comes, you're like, yeah, I'm getting it. I don't like what she has to say. It seems very complicated and terrifying, but do I authenticate that this is a valid, authentic Muse message? I guess, yeah, fine. And I will probably proceed to not listen to like half of it. But luckily, that's not what happens in the story. Now, Iron John, Faithful John gets the download, and there's several ways he could handle it, right? He could say, okay, look, my liege, my king, I'm going to tell you something that's going to save your life. And by the time I'm finished telling, I will turn to stone. But after I finish telling, you have to carry the ball down the field. Okay? You got me? And he doesn't do that. He's like, I can't trust this kid because this kid is uninitiated. He's still half-baked. I have to freaking take care of this myself. Okay. Either way, it would have been a test. So I think on the margin, Faithful John does the right thing here because the masculine is uninitiated. He needs to sort of protect him from the dangers of, initiation. So pulling back here at the 30,000 foot level, what happens in the face of a botched initiation, which is the beginning part of the story? You get a download from the Muse on what to do next. And it's not guaranteed. You can still fail. Said another way, it's still a test because if you had done the original initiation, even the original initiation would have been a test. All right. So there's no guarantee. Like not every seed that's sown. Some seeds fall on rocks, some seeds fall on sand, some seeds fall on good soil. Not every seed grows up. Okay. And the nature of masculine initiation, I think I've talked about this in other sessions, but just really quick, the nature of masculine initiation is that there's obviously feminine initiation as well, but the texture of initiation is a little bit different between masculine and feminine because in the feminine case, the metronome is your actual body, right? There are major sort of changes from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3. So a girl's first menses, childbirth, right? Menopause, right? These are biological milestones that we haven't quite yet found a way to completely screw up with science, right? So there are these major milestones, whether you like it or not. With a male, it's a little bit different because there are not these same kinds of tectonic changes in the nature of a man's body, right? He is by definition a more general purpose Swiss Army knife. And it takes not biology, but the culture to tell a boy what his role in society is going to be. And it differs often from culture to culture, right? But there is this always general message that, the feminine is the key thing that is the valuable thing. The masculine is, this is a bit of a harsh way of putting it, but it is also true, is expendable, right? If you have one woman left in the village, she can, with one man, she can repopulate the entire village. If you have one man left in the village and no woman, you're done. Right? So it's just the simple physics of it. And this is why, by the way, we send our men off to war, because they are expendable. Okay. And the point of initiation is to initiate a boy and train him and inculcate in him and install in him the software of that culture, which basically tells you as a boy the thing that is greater than yourself that you will give your life for. Nobody needs to tell this to a woman. I mean, there are initiation rituals as well, because if nothing else, once a woman gives birth and she sees her baby, it's like nobody needs to tell her, right, that she's going to die for this little like slimy peanut that just like emerged from her body, right? So, so when we lose initiation on the male side, the very fabric and pillar of society is put at risk. I mean, just look at our modern world where like uninitiated boys are running the planet, right? So anyway, so the Muse steps in and redoes the initiation by telling faithful John, here's what you need to do. And it's still a series of 3 trials. Okay. So he goes through the trials, and these are classic trials, right? But inflected in this sort of makeup. These are the same similar trials to male initiation around the world, but it's sort of like the makeup version when you were sick for an exam. This is like the makeup version. So the first trial is the red horse. You have the classic colors of red, white, black as symbols of the stage of life. And horse is a symbol of embodiment. So it's from the neck down, your instinct, your embodiment. Red is the first phase of life in the male system. Red is the red of blood spilled in battle, the fiery young man phase of life. Then the next phase is white, which is the mid phase, a man in his middle-age prime, right, where the sun is at high noon, it's pure white light, it casts no shadows, full power. White is also the white of semen, right? So this sort of full, clean, pure phase of power in a man's life. And then black is the black of the elder sage, right? So the Obi-Wan, the Dumbledore, the Gandalf stage of a man's life. So the first phase of initiation is to get past the red phase of the horse. If the king is not equipped, he will be killed by the horse. And he is uninitiated, so he will be killed by the horse. Okay. In a way, it is up to this Muse guided part of you, faithful John, to step in front of the horse and transform the horse to make sure you get past this phase. Okay. The red horse shows up in multiple other stories and traditions. So the other Grimm's tale, Iron John, which is the one made popular by Robert Bly in the 80s and 90s. There are 3 horses, the red horse, the white horse, and the black horse as well. In the Parzival story from the Celtic tradition that I quoted, the sort of too ill to live but unable to die, the first trial of Parzival when he gets to Arthur's court is that he defeats the Red Knight who is like stalking and trolling Arthur outside the castle, right? And he takes on the red armor and the red horse and everything. This is all the same thing. Okay. So the key is to get past this. And so I think in my notes here, we talked about, like I mentioned something in our call about, what is the example of this in my own case at a personal level, right? So I'm like going to be 50, what year is it? I'm going to be 52 this year. So I grew up in like, the 70s, 80s, and sort of 90s. And in that era of our modern society, there were very few paths forward for a young man, right? It's like medicine, arts, commerce. I chose sort of corporate/tech to get through. But I'm actually a healer, right? And a non-medical healer, right? And a non-sort of hippie, shamanist, sage burning healer. So to initiate into that path, I've had to rely on the Muse, like wholesale to guide me through. I don't even know what it is. Even now, I'm like, the core of it is dream reading. And even now I'm starting to sort of, openly, publicly sort of speak to that, right? So for me, it's like my actual path, I have no idea what it is, because in modern society, there is no track for what I do, but the Muse has gotten me through it, with me often sort of kicking and screaming, getting dragged along the way. So the next phase is this wedding shirt. And clothing is another symbol of embodiment in these stories, right? Now, the wedding shirt is sort of the thing that helps you embody in order to have your wedding. And the wedding in myth and fairy tale is the place where inner masculine and inner feminine fully integrate. Right, and the wedding shirt is gold and silver, so masculine and feminine full integration. Okay, and we know the young king is not ready for this. He is by definition half-baked. So if he wears this, he will be burned to the marrow, which at a meta level could be okay, because death in a dream is a symbol of transformation. So it transforms you. So that's another way of getting through. Okay. Because death is a symbol of transformation. And you think about the wedding shirt, how many of us, even here, in hindsight, have realized we entered into literal external marriage when we were not fully initiated and ready? And that marriage experience phase of our lives burned us down to our bones and the marrow in our bones, right? And that experience is like an external version of putting on the wedding shirt too early. And so here, the faithful John Muse within you steps in with gloves, saves the day. It makes no sense. Even to faithful John, it makes no sense. Right? But he knows it's legit because he heard it from the ravens. Right? So, in real life, sometimes you're in a relationship, you think everything's fine, and sort of mythopoetically speaking, like there's a paratrooper strike team within you that busts in and just extracts you out of the relationship, right? Or friends that intervene. It's like, dude, you're not marrying this person, right? And like, what are you talking? And when they pull you out, and the fever lifts, you realize, oh my gosh, I did avoid sort of disaster. Okay, just random examples here. So there's a part of you that knows this move is legit. That is the key in life. That's increasingly why when we teach things, we're not just teaching about like how to save your marriage or how to save your job or whatever. We're teaching more life skills, like how to connect with your muse to figure out what your right direction is, how to actually grieve. So you clear the fog of backlog of losses that you have been denying and not processing, so that you can see clearly the road ahead of your life, right? It's about learning these skills overall and not just solving like how to not get fired from your job, right? Or how to save your relationship. There's a larger meta level question that's beyond that. Okay, so that's the wedding shirt. And then the third phase is you went ahead with the integration of masculine and feminine. You got married, so the young king is married to the princess. That's fine. Everything's still half-baked. And we're still stumbling forward. And after the wedding, or during the wedding celebration, the queen falls unconscious. Right? So the masculine brute forces their way through, and now the feminine cannot hold up her end of the dance. And the way to get through this is to take the red of the masculine, the half-baked red of the masculine in the form of the 3 drops of blood, from the right breast, which is the right side is the masculine, left is feminine, and spit it out, because it is poison. It is this uninitiated masculine poison remaining in the queen, in the inner feminine. And when she faints, it has overtaken her. This poison of the uninitiated inner masculine needs to be drawn out somehow. And we could spend a whole day retreat on just these 3 drops of blood, but that's basically the third level of the initiation. And again, faithful John steps in and is like, what could possess him to think it would be okay to take the unconscious queen into a separate room, bare her right breast, suck 3 drops of blood out, and spit them out, and like everything's gonna be okay. Obviously, everything's not gonna be okay. Right? Even the king is like, all right, yeah, no, just no. So Faithful John is cooked, right? But he's following the muse faithfully.
Yeah. I mean, this part of the story was just so powerful for me. When we came to this and you talked about all of these dynamics, that's when I realized, like, this is the part where it spoke to me so powerfully that I sat in like discomfort, not being able to hold space. Because, in my case, in my personal life, right, in my previous marriage, when I went through, I mean, I can now relate to this, where you get burned to the marrow because you stepped in something that you were not ready for. And then, I can relate to the whole fainting of the inner feminine as well, just checked out of the marriage because it's just no longer possible to continue to do this dance that was
feminine is the muse too, so you lose all your muse inspiration in the process.
Absolutely. And then you can't carry on with that dance because there were so many things messed up, starting from not dealing in good faith and all of those things. Like this is what's going on in outer life, but at the same time, in my own grief cycle, in my own healing cycle, I also realized the outer reflects the inner. So while I could be saying all of those things about how the outer masculine did this or that, or did not do this or did not do that, it is a reflection of...
You wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah, but to realize it is a reflection of the uninitiated inner masculine as well, like within me, that shows up in the outer world. And the greater challenge is not just to change the circumstances of the outer life, but to change how things are oriented in the inner world. And that's when you go into grief, because what is being asked of you, this entire transformation, is sucking drops of blood and spitting it out. In the story, it's like a line. Oh, Faithful John came in and he sucked 3 drops of blood, he spat it out, and the queen just sat up. How it plays out in your life is it takes months and years for this entire process. And it's a transformational process. So it takes a lot out of you. And then you go through grief. You exile your muse, even though your muse is the one who's guiding you through this entire thing, literally saving your life, and bringing you back. But you still exile the muse. It's if this is the kind of shit that I will have to go through every transformation cycle, I think I've had enough of you. kind of send the muse off. I'm not doing this.
Yeah, and the incredible thing is just like with a lot of things that are muse-led in our lives, nobody can explain what the heck is happening. The king can't explain what's happening. Faithful John can't explain what's happening. I mean, he can't even say the ravens told me because he'll turn to stone. But even if he could, what does that even mean? The ravens told you. What are you even talking about? Right? You have defiled the body of the queen. And the queen can't even explain. She can't wake up and say, no, this is fine. This was our plan. God from heaven came down and said this was... She can't even explain it. But it worked.
Yeah.
Because she's alive.
Yeah.
And nobody can explain.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of something when we were debriefing on the Bali retreat. Something funny you said was that it's almost like nobody who attended the Bali retreat could quite articulate why they were there. I mean, it was creating the life of your dream and manifestation. They all showed up. I mean, there were 2 friends there where one friend showed up and basically told the other friend, you don't even know who this guy is. I'm paying for you to come to Bali with me.
Mm.
And arguably she had the biggest transformation of everyone during that retreat. And it's just like the Muse is just like leading us to even create the Bali retreat, leading people sight unseen just to show up for the retreat. And all
We
this
hadn't
magic
even planned
happened.
this. We didn't even want to do this.
We didn't even want to do it. I
We
was
were
like, why
like,
am I
let's
doing
go holidaying in Bali. We're not doing a retreat.
Yeah, we're not going to Bali to work. We're going to like chill. And then
Yeah.
we're doing this retreat, and it's been life-changing. It's been even for me, it's been life-changing.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so back to the story. When your life is saved and the queen's life is saved, right? It looks like it's the wrong masculine inappropriately interacting with the wrong feminine. And the king says, too much, too much. And this happens all the time. When the Muse tells you to do something, you're like, crazy lady, no, we're not doing that. No.
Yeah.
And then at the 11th hour, right, the Muse part of you really reveals everything. It's like you realize at the Bali retreat, oh my gosh, my Muse has been guiding me all my life. My Muse has been saving my ass from one careening car crash into the next. And what happens next is you realize this, but it still gets stuck. Right, this happened in Bali, where a number of advisees, I feel, realized how deeply the Muse has been guiding them. But just knowing it intellectually doesn't guarantee you know how to continue getting download, and you even know, just because Faithful John tells you what the rest of the story is going to be, there's no guarantee you're going to implement that. Right? So even after the Muse tells you at the 11th hour, the Muse turns to stone. But you realize it and you keep it close to you. You keep it in the most precious place of honor next to your bed. Right? And you're like, I'm so sorry, talk to me. And you're channeled to the Muse. You're channeled to the ravens, which is Faithful John. This faithful part of your inner masculine is shut off. Okay. And so what do you do to fix that then? Okay. So the way you fix this next part of the sort of brain surgery that this fairy story is detailing for us is to properly initiate the next emerging generation of your own inner masculine, which in this story is symbolized by the two boys. Right? They are the version 2.0 of Faithful John and the King, the sort of double inner masculine. Right? And this beheading is a pagan image. There's nothing in the Christian tradition that talks of beheading. That's why right before the beheading scene, the story is careful to say, yeah, everyone's at church. The queen is at church. Everyone is praying devoutly while this thing is happening. Because it's like this, except, so there's no beheading in the Christian tradition, except maybe John the Baptist and Salome or whatever, but basically not. And so this covering is like how all of this wisdom is made sanitized and smuggled forward, right? And this always reminds me hilariously of like, when I do talks in corporate tech audiences, I'm smuggling stuff in too, right? So, I mean, in a couple weeks later this month, I'll be doing a talk on 0-minute meditation at Microsoft, right? And it's like mindfulness, it's wellness, it's like helping everyone reduce stress. But when I teach mindful meditation and action, what I'm also teaching you at the same time is how to maintain sacred space within you, even as you walk through the profane cubicle farm of your tech company, right? So we go in talking about the accepted things. Everyone's at church. This is all about productivity for your employees. And then deeper stuff intrinsically gets transmitted as well. Because this is what people are actually asking for, but they just can't say it out loud. Okay, so here, the direction is to behead the two boys. So, and this is a horrifying image, right? But remember, these two boys are symbols of parts of your own inner self. Okay, so the emerging masculine principle within you.
Mm-hmm.
And what does the head symbolize? The head symbolizes intellect, right? Mind over matter. So neck up over neck down. Okay. So the head is the seat of spirit. The body is the seat of soul. The head is the seat of abstract thinking, disembodied intellect. When you say, I'm too much in my head, I need to go out and go for a hike, I need to get out of my head, I need to work out, I need to get out of my head. That's what that means. So what this part of the story is saying is that the healing path within you is to behead the double emerging inner masculine. In other words, to disconnect the intellect, to not be all about the intellect, and take that life force, which is linked to the poison 3 drops of blood. But here, once you have removed the tyranny of the intellect, that blood is no longer poison, it becomes the cure. You take that embodied life force of the body-focused, headless you, where you're all body, you're all feeling, you're all intuition, and you've pushed aside, you have beheaded and put aside intellect. And that is the blood that is now properly balanced. And that is the blood you put on the frozen muse. And your channel to the muse comes back to life. Okay. The minute the channel of your muse comes back to life, right? And when you say, take your intellect away, right? And you say whether it makes sense or not. You say it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense, right? But it makes sense in your body. It feels right.
Yeah.
Okay. So with the next generation of the masculine, right from the beginning, you say, I am going to trust this intuition within me now. This intuition within me is not a servant anymore, but I recognize it as my direct connection to the divine. Now, we're not going to build a shrine to it because it's like, medieval Christianity. We're going to get into trouble, right? But maybe we call it a saint, right? We can still worship saints. We can worship Saint John. Our Lady, right? Notre Dame is not a goddess, but we can still build, the Chartres Cathedral in her honor. And we can get away with that. Okay. And so when you use the emerging masculine life force to feed and nourish and revive the muse, you have properly initiated the masculine within you. The muse unlocks and instantly restores the inner masculine. Right? What is the blood Faithful John uses to put the heads back on? It's the same embodied blood. The blood that brings back the muse is the same blood that puts your head back on your shoulders. The heads are put back, and they went back just like they were before. So it's not that we are biased against intellect. It's that there is a phase where we need to put intellect aside to fully commit and connect with our intuition. Once that's done, bring intellect back. Intellect is actually the servant of intuition, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens with this part of you and you yourself is that you are born again. You are twice born. You were born once, and then after initiation, you died and you were born again once your head was put back. Right? In the ancient world, Greco-Roman world, after you went to an initiation and you were initiated into the mysteries of Dionysus or initiated into the mysteries of Eleusis, right? You were referred to as being a member of the twice born. Okay. So with this action, beheading, the king then finally passes his initiation and has his direct, living, revivified connection with the divine. And they do the same thing to the queen. Right? It seems cruel to trick her and put her on the spot, but what it really means to me is that you're giving the inner feminine full sovereignty to make her own decision.
Yeah.
And thank goodness, thank the goddess, she makes the right decision. Right? But when it's the muse filling you, you make the right call and you let her decide for herself. And when she decides and you decide independently, you come together, then you live happily ever after.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the wrap up of the story.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was just so insightful, and particularly the last part where you have all of this come together, you know, and the inner masculine initiated, and even the emerging masculines. We have a glimpse of what happens to them, right? And they
That's
go
right.
through the right initiation. It all comes together so beautifully. You know, it's funny. It brought to me the images of tarot cards. I was thinking of particularly in the series of the cups, which deals with, you know, intuition and feeling. You have the Page of Cups and the Knight of Cups and then the King of Cups, right? So I'm picking out 3 cards here, all 3 of them masculine. And you have this Page of Cups. The way it's depicted is this page, this young man holding a cup, and there's like a little fish coming out of it. And it looks as though he's kind of puzzled by it, is curious, but you know, he doesn't particularly know what he's supposed to do with it. And we've talked about how fish is a symbol of insight and intuition and all of that. So it's like it's coming
and the
out
salmon
of the cup.
Of wisdom. Yes.
Yeah, salmon of wisdom. He still doesn't know what he's supposed to do.
Right.
And then when you see the Knight of Cups, which is like one step ahead, he's on a white horse. He's riding a white horse.
Right.
And he's holding the cup. And the whole stance is like, yeah, he's on a mission. He knows what to do. And he's like, the horse is like, you know, it's not galloping, it's cantering. And, you know, everything's comfortable, everything's balanced. And then you get to the King of Cups, who is like the King of Cups. Like he is the one who even regulates and sort of coordinates the flow of intuition. He's so in control. He's like the master of, you know, receiving the intuition and knowing what to do with it and then passing it on and then, you know, all of that. So you have this, like you said, you know, he's the receiver and the carrier of the messages from the muse.
Right.
Like he takes
well, that's what the cup is the feminine. The cup is the symbol of the feminine, right? It's the container, the Holy Grail, right? In its cup form. Yeah.
So the progression from the Page of Cups to the King of Cups, it felt like this entire story is like, okay, this is how you progress from step 1, 2, 3. So it all comes together. That was
I love
lovely.
that.
Thank you.
I love that. You can almost call them the Page of the Muse and the Knight of the Muse. And the king, the king's servant of the muse.
Servant of the muse, yeah.
I love that. I love that. Good one.
Thank you. And what would you say should be like the reflection exercise and something to think about?
So here's something to think about. Again, only if you want, just take some time to journal this when you have some alone time. And so I think the interesting question for us, if we want to sit with this more, is to ask ourselves, what is the faithful John part of you in your inner life? Right? What is the part of you that has stepped in and intervened at critical parts of your life and basically saved your ass? Right? The inner part of you that may have taken over, caused you to feel like, in hindsight, you were possessed, that caused you to end a relationship or quit a job. Where at the time you're like, I know I have to do this. I can't even say why. I think it was like that book, Eat, Pray, Love, right? And I think it was the Julia Roberts movie version of it. And in the beginning, when she leaves her husband, she was distraught and crying on the bathroom floor and all of those things. And one of the things she was crying was that on paper, the marriage was perfect.
Yeah.
And she knew she had to end it, but she could not articulate in logical terms, even to herself, why.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not like it's no stakes. It's like causing pain all around. You know? So to me, this is some faithful John part of her saying like, we're doing this. We're hitting the button. Even though like the majority part of you is like, this makes like absolutely no sense. And yet there's a part of me that's like, this is what we are doing. Come what may, this is what we are doing.
Yeah.
Right? When you have like, and so what is this part of you that has come up and taken over control of the steering wheel of your life at certain points, gotten you through, and to the extent that you're not in the middle of a crisis like this right now, where is this part of you now? Are you in touch with it? What is it whispering to you? Because I mean, for me, I would like to know what it's whispering before it actually has to like call in the SWAT team and like just take over. I would prefer my life to be orderly and sequential in that, but you know, something tells me that's just not on the cards, because for whatever reason, your own faithful John can't tell you in advance how it's going to go down. You just need to keep stumbling forward based on your need and want, perhaps not enough due to your desire. And
I think there's a whole
correct. Yeah.
I think there's a whole session, or I don't know, it was probably even a retreat on why you turn into stone when you reveal things in advance. Because I've tried this with my muse, and I was like, tell me in advance how this is all going to come out. And she just goes,
she just looks at you like, yeah.
Nothing. I'm just going to give you one breadcrumb right now, like one thing. You do it, and then you find out what the next thing is.
It's
like,
maddening. It's like maddening. I'm like, really? I've been following you for, you know, kicking and screaming, but for so long, and you can't give me the full roadmap. And she was like, even more so, not now. I'm like, all right, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So just to echo that, I definitely feel like there's some kind of deeper month-long session on this. I have no idea what is even the topic. I don't know. So if anyone listening has ideas on that, tell me. I would love to brainstorm. Yeah, because I am, after Bali, I'm not even going to get into like the life-changing transformation that this whole month of travel was for me. But I'm ready to get going, right? I'm ready to dream read publicly and acknowledge that part of what I do and lead that into other things. And so the folks who tend to listen to LSS are, you know, they've been following us. They know what I do. So if you have any flashes of Muse intuition that you think you could share with me without turning into stone, you know, please let us know. I'd love to hear. I'd love to get Muse signal from, you know, folks listening as well. Only if you want. Only if you want. All right. So anything else?
Thank you. No, thank you for that. It's a lot to think about.
It's so much to think about. Okay. So I'll go ahead and close the session. What I'm going to do is post the link to the next session. So the next session is next month. It's free, open to the public. Please feel free to invite more people to come in, but only if you want. And you have the link. You can sign up for that now. And I'll go ahead and now close the session as well. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, as always, for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for co-creating and sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great Sunday. Have a great week. Have a great month. And I will see you all in the next session. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.